Well, hello there. You're listening to Theology on the Road. My name is Steve Schramm. I am your host. I will be chauffeuring you along on this adventure, and this is really the inaugural episode of this brand new podcast from our ministry. We've been blogging and podcasting and doing videos for quite some time now over at steveschramm.com, and this is just kind of the latest iteration, the latest evolution, to use a taboo term, one that we'll talk about, I'm sure, from time to time here on the podcast, the latest evolution of our ministry, really, and what we're going to be doing here is bringing you thoughts on theology, on practical theology, bringing the deep truths of Scripture up to the way they apply in our daily lives. You know, that's one of the things that I see really is a disconnect in academic circles. You seem to have this bifurcation, right? You seem to have those who are into the deep theology, the Bible nerds, so to speak. They talk about their theology. They love their theology. They could rattle off the names of the genealogies and such like that they read in the Bible. And then you have this other camp of Christians who you'd barely know that they're Christians because they seem completely uninterested in the Bible unless they are at church on Sunday. And so it's really interesting. What I want to do is create people who have a balance. Would it be great for everybody to be able to memorize lists of genealogies in the Bible? Well, sure, but we're probably not going to get there with everybody. Frankly, I'm not there. So I don't, supposed to be some sort of super expert, but I do love the deep things of the Bible and the deep truths of Scripture. And I think that as you read Scripture, you find that that Scripture itself was very important to the folks, the characters in the narratives of Scripture. And what was important to them should, I think, be important to us as well. So what we want to do is kind of find this mix. We want to understand not the deep theology for theology's sake. We want to understand how the theology and the apologetics, which is the defense of Scripture, really speaks to issues in our everyday life. And honest to goodness, it's the perfect time for something like this, because the world that we live in right now is this way. We have to be able to defend what we believe. We have to be able to talk about what we believe. And many Christians not only can't defend what we believe to others, but they don't hardly know what they believe themselves and what the Scriptures actually teach about things. So that is why I think there's a great need for a podcast such as this. Now, one of the things about this podcast that's going to be a little different than some others and some of the other ones even that we have produced is that it's going to be very informal, very conversational, and the previous podcasts that we have produced as a part of this ministry, which is Steve Schramm Ministries, you can go to steveschramm.com and check out what we've done, have been more formal, and I still have one of those ongoing. Basically, we started with a podcast in late 2017 called The Creation Academy, and 60 episodes in or so, we decided to rebrand that to speak to a wider range of topics. Currently, it's called The Steve Schramm Show, and we experienced some ups and downs with that. When I switched it over to the Steve Schramm Show, we actually lost some listenership, and that was a bit discouraging for me. It seemed we had more listenership when all we talked about was creation and things of that nature. So I've tossed around with going back to making that main podcast be just about creation, and one of these days we may still do that. But I have a lot going on. I have a full-time job. I have a family of three soon. A family of three children, of course, and then my wife, and that's soon to be 4 children. I also have a side business that is actually a couple of different side businesses doing the same thing, but to different kind of niche markets, and that's doing web design and marketing, consulting and branding strategy and things of that nature for different kinds of clients. So I do those things, and the Lord has blessed. The Lord has really blessed and has grown these other endeavors, which I really do my best to incorporate ministry into them as well, in every way that I possibly can. And the Lord has really blessed those things, and I'm to the point right now where I'm just about to the max. I mean, I am an extremely busy person. I think I am still able, through being very intentional about it, I am still able to achieve a level of balance that I think is healthy, but not always. I'm working on that. I have to get better at that. We all do. And one of the things with that is, it's important that I take care of my family. And the Lord has really blessed, like I said, and with that blessing comes a huge time commitment and me needing to be a much more active player in the in the stuff I'm doing with my side business. So I'm working on building a little team to help me out with things over there, but one of the casualties is a time to create content is just really hard. And so most of the things that I spend my time doing right now are things that I'm being paid for, if I'm being just quite honest. And a couple years of doing ministry work, and I've never received a dime for it. I've created products, I've created pages where folks could give support, etc. And I've never really seen anything from that. So it's not all about the money. It's not even remotely about the money, to be honest. But it does, when you are going to devote a considerable amount of time to doing things, it does take money. As the quote goes, churches are not built, ministries are not built, by the way, either, on spare time and pocket change. That is just the bottom line. God's people have to be able to give to the work in order for the work to go on. So, I've been exploring lately some ways that I could bring my thoughts on Christian theology and apologetics and creation and things of that nature to an audience without such a harsh time commitment. I mean, truth be told, the way that I have created content for the ministry in the past has been enough time, hours upon hours upon hours per week, to be a full-time job. And at this season of my life, while I would love to, in the future, return to a period of time where I am doing some more of that, at this season of my life, it's just not possible. And so I still wanted to be able to do this, though, to be able to bring my thoughts to folks. And that was the genesis, another pun, if you will, that was the genesis of the Theology on the Road podcast that you hopefully, Lord willing, find yourself listening to right now. And we're ditching the formalities. We don't have the fancy intro music. We don't have the fancy, I say the same thing at the beginning of every show and close the show out the same way. We don't have all of that stuff. We may have some guests in the future, but we may not. I don't know. It's going to be very conversational. I'm not sitting here in front of notes. I used to spend hours reading and prepping for each and every single episode. And I still spend a lot of time reading in the time that I can spare, which is very little, but I do spend the time that I can in reading and stuff. And so everything here is more conversational. It's off the cuff. And I can come up with a topic. I mean, I could talk about theology, apologetics, practical Christian living, and things like that all day long. So I don't have to be sitting in front of a computer screen and have 5 bullet points in front of me or an even longer outline to be able to do this. And through that realization, I am hoping that this podcast will really be something that connects with you. I hope that as you listen to this, you find it helpful. I hope that you really appreciate the conversational nature of this, the informal nature of this. We just want to have fun, right? Learn how to honor Christ with our lives, with our understanding of theology, our understanding of God's truth that He gives us in His revelation, the Bible. I mean, it's a wonderful book, a very practical book, but a book that could be mined for literally millennia, as it has been, and the depths of it still not be uncovered. So with this podcast, there's no episode limits. There's no episode frequency. I might do 1 podcast a day. I might do 2 a day. I might go 3 weeks and not post anything. I really don't know. It's really going to kind of be off the cuff. One thing that I would like to mention is questions. So this podcast is actually being hosted for you nerds out there on a format, on a podcast host called Anchor. And Anchor is a host that has been somewhat controversial for content from the respect of copyright ownership and stuff like that. But I think for the most part, they've got that nailed down. And the fact of the matter is it's so easy on this platform to produce a podcast that it's just a no-brainer for me to do for this particular project, for the Theology on the Road podcast. I can churn out content like nobody's business, literally while I am driving on the road. And so that is exactly the way that I have chosen to come about this. There are some things that we're going to be working towards, milestones and things like that from a financial mindset and or from a financial aspect, and we'll talk about that later. But what I was started to mention was the hosting platform is Anchor. And Anchor makes it really, really easy for you to submit questions into the podcast. So that is going to be a huge thing on this podcast that I realized that at first, while it's gaining listenership, not very many people are going to have questions probably because, well, it's just going to be a matter of gaining listenership before that really starts to come in. But what I want to say is this. If you have a comment or questions, maybe there are those of you out there who don't have questions, but you just want to share your opinion on something or a thought on something that I could listen to, play here on the podcast, and just jive off of for a few minutes, I would absolutely love that. To me, that almost sounds even more fun than answering questions. So I'm going to say this. If you have a thought that you want to share or a question, the link is in the description of the podcast, but you could just go to steveschramm.com/ask, and that will take you to anchor.fm/theology-on-the-road/message. And it's going to allow you to record a message with your voice. Again, I've tried to give you a simpler link. Just go to steveschramm.com/ask, and you will be able to record a thought or an opinion or a question or whatever right there. And maybe it's just thanks for producing this. I would love to hear that, right? I would love to put that in there and just talk about that for a minute. So whatever it is, I seriously would love for you to do that so that I have some content from you all and some interaction from you all to jive off of. Honest to goodness, just speaking from my heart here, one of the very hardest things about producing the content in the way I have so far is, aside from the blog comments I would get, it's not been very conversational. It's very one-sided. And that's hard to do. As a content creator, that's really hard. So I would appreciate for this to be more of a conversation. I'd love for you to chime in with your thoughts. I will play them on the podcast. I will jive off of them. If you have a theology question, a practical Christian living question, a question of, is the Bible trustworthy kind of question, is evolution true, that kind of question, I would love for you to submit your questions in by going to steveschramm.com/ask, and we can jive on them and talk about them right here on the podcast as I'm going down the road. I would love to be able to do this. I'd love to put a podcast out every single day. That would be great. I'm probably not going to put a podcast out every day without some content though to have, to be able to work with, to answer, to comment on. So that's going to be a necessary thing. So steveschramm.com/ask. If you take nothing else away from this first podcast, I really hope that you get that and that you are a long-time listener. And as you listen over the long term, you are somebody who regularly comments in. Don't just do it once. Comment in regularly. I would love that because it really helps promote that whole conversational aspect of this podcast. The last thing I would say is this. I have come to a point right now where, again, because I'm spending the majority of my time by necessity doing things that generate income for our family, I am treating this completely as a labor of love. And honest to goodness, I find it hard to do the whole donation model raising thing. I've got a Patreon account. Nobody signed up on there, and again, it's not about the money, but it takes money to support the work and to be practical from the standpoint of doing this and actually teaching the materials. So, I will say this: if you are a person who finds it conducive to your own situation, where you would love to support this, this particular project, if you would like to see the Theology on the Road podcast flourish and allow me to devote more time to it, etc., then I would love to have your support. Fortunately, Anchor makes it very, very easy, and they provide a very secure payment gateway through Stripe to also support the podcast. I'm not going to be asking for money on a regular basis, but every now and then I am going to mention this because we have goals that we want to work towards. I have things that we're going to get that I'd like to get for this podcast, and I've pretty much determined in my heart that I am not going to spend all kinds of money to make this podcast anything more than what it is right now, because I want real people who are getting help from this podcast to vote with their dollars that they love this podcast enough to see it improve in the ways that I would like to see it improve. So I have goals. I have 3 written down right now that I would like to achieve, and we're just going to knock them out one at a time. And if it takes a year or 2 or 3 to achieve them, then fine. Lord willing, I can keep this podcast going for a long time. Because I've not placed any consistency requirements on it, I think I can. But I would love to receive your support. Anchor, again, makes it very, very easy through a very secure payment processor, probably the leading payment processor in the world right now, to be able to pledge your support for either $1, $5, or $10 per month. At the $10, which is actually $9.99 level per month, the creator, so me, the ministry, would get 13% more of the profits, is the way the equation will work out from that. So we get 13% more of the actual payment. So that would be wonderful. I'd love for you to support at either $1, which is 99 cents, or $4.99 or $9.99 per month. If you'd like to see us be able to purchase some new things, I'll go ahead and tell you the first goal right now. The first goal is, right now I have no way to distribute this podcast other than people finding it on their podcast platform, and the little bit that I'm able to promote it through some of my other content. But remember, I'm not creating any other content right now. Well, at least not that much. Not that much at all. And so getting the word out about this podcast is very much going to be word of mouth. I'm not even going to have very elaborate show notes. It's going to be very hard for people to find this podcast. So I'm just being honest with you. It's going to be hard for people to find this podcast unless it shares via word of mouth. So one of the chief ways that I would love to get this podcast out there is through a recurring social media schedule. I'd love to be able to plug this into the current social media channels I have for the ministry, and that way it could have regular awareness being created for it. The problem is that, again, with, a lot of times you can put detailed things into your descriptions and things of that nature to help people find the podcast when they search, but I really don't even have time to do that. So my descriptions are very short and everything. So one of the primary ways in the future that this podcast is going to be brought to people is through social media scheduling tools. That is a scheduling tool automatically sharing out this podcast across the social media channels I have to make people aware of the content that has been published. Okay, so the thing with this is the one that we would need, and trust me, I've vetted many of these through the different things that I do. The one that we would need to have a dedicated platform for this podcast would be $15 a month. It's through RecurPost, RecurPost. It's a software service that works great for this kind of thing. And RecurPost, $15 a month. So I'm announcing right now that I am looking for my first $15 per month of support. That means I need at least one person to support it at the $9.99 level, and at least one person to support it at the $4.99 level, or 15 people at the 99-cent level. You see what I'm saying? Again, I say, though, that at the beginning stages especially, this podcast is not something that is going to be very easily promoted. So I'm going to let the people who listen to this, who end up listening to this, and by the way, if you can't or whatever, contribute. I don't want you to feel bad. I'm not trying to make you feel bad right now. There's lots of ministries I would love to contribute to that I can't, okay? It's just not practical for me. So if that's you, I understand that. But if it's even remotely practical for you and you think the things that we talk about on here are valuable enough that other people need to hear it, then I would love, and again, no hard feelings if you don't, okay? But if you find it in your heart and you find it in your wallet and you think it works for you, I would love for you to support this, and with that, show me that you think this is something worth it, that other people could hear and enjoy, and this would make it so much easier to spread the message and to spread the word about this podcast. So God bless you. Thank you, heavens, for listening to this podcast. This has been probably one of the longest ones we're going to do. I don't know. I imagine most of these are going to be short, but this one has not been. So I would love for you to continue listening. Listen to the first few episodes, 10 episodes, 20, however much you need to decide whether or not it's worth supporting. If you decide it's worth supporting, I would be honored. I would love to have your support, and you better believe I will be super appreciative of that and will not take it for granted, and we'll put it to good use. As soon as the amount of money comes in that I need to buy Recur Post for $15 a month, that's exactly what I'm going to do. I'm going to buy Recur Post, and I'll prove it to you. I'll show you the invoice. Whatever you want me to do, okay? If it ends up that we end up making enough to make a little profit for doing this, wonderful, but that's not the goal. The goal right now is to be able to improve the podcast itself and the amount of people that people get to hear it, right? So that's what we want to do. That's the goal. All right. So thank you so much. Don't forget the two main things. Well, the three main things really are, number one, to keep listening. Number two, stevestram.com/ask to give a comment or ask a question. And three, stevestram.com/support to actually go in and support this ministry and support this podcast and its growth. All right. I love you so much for taking the time to listen to Theology on the Road. We'll see you in the next one.